sugar gets talked about today almost entirely as a modern problem, something to cut back on, feel guilty about, hide from your kids. But the craving underneath all of that isn't modern at all. It's older than you are, in the most literal sense possible. And figuring out when ancient humans actually started eating sugar means untangling a craving that predates any actual sugar existing at all. Start before anyone could have learned to like anything. A researcher named Jacob Steiner ran a series of studies in the early 1970s testing how newborn infants react to different tastes placed on their tongues before they'd had any real chance to be taught a preference by anyone. Bitter and sour tastes reliably produced a clear aversive reaction, a scrunched, unhappy face. Sweetness did the opposite. Newborns responded to a sweet solution with a relaxed, pleasurable expression, sometimes even something close to a small smile. This wasn't a learned habit picked up from candy or dessert. It was wired in from birth, present before a baby had ever eaten a single solid meal. In evolutionary terms, that makes sense. Sweetness reliably signals ripe fruit and other calorie-dense, safe-to-eat food, while bitterness often signals the opposite, a plant defending itself with a toxin. A built-in preference for sweet over bitter is, in a real sense, a built-in preference for survival. Steiner's later work went even further, comparing these same facial reactions across human infants and other primate species, and found strikingly similar responses. That comparison matters because it suggests this isn't some quirk unique to human babies. It's a much older piece of primate biology, something your species inherited rather than invented, running quietly in the background long before anyone alive today, or their parents' parents ever existed. So the hunger for sweetness goes back further than any human culture, further than agriculture, further than fire. But wanting something and actually getting it regularly are two very different things. And for most of human history, concentrated sweetness wasn't easy to come by. Ripe fruit is seasonal and often scattered. There was really only one food source dense enough and worth enough risk to count as ancient humans deliberately going out and getting sugar on purpose. Honey. An anthropologist named Crittenden has studied exactly this among the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer group in Tanzania who still forage much of their food today. Her research found that honey, the single most energy-dense food available to them, makes up roughly 30% of Hadza men's diet on average. And in some months, when other food is harder to find, over 60% of the calories they eat come from honey alone. That's not a rare treat. That's a primary food strategy worth the real risk of climbing a tall tree and getting stung repeatedly by an angry, defended hive because the payoff in pure, concentrated energy was worth it. Long before anyone grew a single stalk of sugarcane, honey was very likely how that ancient, wired-in craving for sweetness actually got satisfied, at least occasionally, by hunter-gatherers willing to fight a hive full of bees for it. Honey is also unusual among wild foods in exactly the way that matters here. Fruit ripens on a schedule you don't control, and most of it is a fraction as calorie-dense as a comb full of honey. A hive represents a rare jackpot, a large, concentrated dose of pure sugar sitting in one place, guarded but gettable, if you're willing to accept some pain to get it. Crittenden's research on the Hadza specifically highlights that honey availability tends to peak exactly when hunting success dips during the rainy season, which means it may have functioned as a crucial calorie backstop precisely when other food sources were least reliable. Not a dessert, a survival buffer, sweet almost by coincidence of what nature happened to make it taste like. Actual cultivated sugar has a real starting point, and it's more recent and more specific than most people assume. A 2025 genomic study led by researchers Olivier Garsmeur and Angelique D'Hont traced the domestication history of sugarcane by tracing genetic footprints all the way back to a wild ancestor plant. Their conclusion places the origin of cultivated sugarcane in New Guinea, roughly 8,000 years ago, bred up from a tough wild grass called Saccharum robustum. Here's the detail worth sitting with. Those early growers weren't making sugar in any form you'd recognize. They were growing thick, fibrous stalks and simply chewing on them raw, sucking out the sweet juice directly, the way you might chew on a piece of sugarcane at a market today. No crystals, no granules, no refining process of any kind. just a plant bred over generations to taste sweeter and sweeter when you bit into it. From New Guinea, sugarcane cultivation slowly spread outward through the Pacific Islands and eventually into Asia, reaching places like India within a few thousand years. And it was in India, sometime in the centuries around the 4th century of the Common Era, that sugar finally stopped being something you had to grow and gnaw on directly. People there figured out how to boil down cane juice, evaporate off the water, and crystallize what remained into a solid, storable, transportable form, something closer to actual sugar as you'd picture it today. That shift mattered enormously. A chewed stalk has to be eaten fresh, right where it's grown. A crystallized product can be dried, stored for months, carried long distances, and traded to people who've never seen a sugarcane field in their lives. The same jump from food you eat where you find it to product you manufacture and move that reshaped salt's whole economic story happened here too, just with a sweeter cargo. There's a cost to all this that shows up directly in the archaeological record in something as durable as teeth. Studies comparing the skeletal remains of hunter-gatherer populations against early farming populations consistently find a real jump in dental cavities once diets shifted toward the starchy, sugar-rich foods that came with agriculture. The same easily fermented carbohydrates that made that ancient sweetness craving so satisfying also turned out to be exactly what the bacteria living in every human mouth thrive on, breaking sugars down into acid that slowly eats through enamel. Hunter-gatherer skeletons consistently show far fewer cavities than the farming populations that came after them, even though both groups certainly still enjoyed the occasional taste of something sweet when they could get it. The difference wasn't the craving, it was frequency and abundance. Exactly the two things settled agriculture and eventually crystallized sugar were uniquely good at providing. A craving your body was built with from birth. Once it finally had a reliable, abundant supply to actually satisfy it, started leaving a permanent physical mark behind in the bones and teeth themselves, one that archaeologists can still read thousands of years later. So, when did ancient humans first start eating sugar? The craving itself was there before birth, wired in as a built-in preference for calorie-dense, non-toxic food. The first real answer to it wasn't a cultivated crop at all, but honey, chased down at real physical risk by hunter-gatherers who still do the exact same thing today. Actual sugarcane cultivation traces back roughly 8,000 years to New Guinea, starting as nothing more than a sweet stalk to chew, only becoming the crystallized product you'd recognize much later, once people in Asia worked out how to boil and refine it into something that could travel. An ancient hunger, slowly given easier and easier ways to be satisfied, stalk by stalk, hive by hive, until it finally became the granulated, endlessly available substance sitting in almost every kitchen today. What took your ancestors real risk, real seasonal luck, or generations of patient plant breeding to get even a little of, now sits within arm's reach at almost every meal, largely unnoticed, exactly because that ancient hunger was never actually the problem. It was always going to want sweetness. The world just eventually caught up to it.